Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. First order of business, I want to say thank you so much to my subscribers and to those who push the like button. I would so much like to get it to 1,000 subscribers because then I could use any AdSense money and use a good portion of that towards charity. Yes, I would like to put it towards charities that test untested rape kits, charities for abused children, and the like. So that is my goal. I would like to reach 1,000 subscribers. So today's video is again about the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik. And I also want to redo a portion of it because I made some mistakes or I left some important details out of my video last time. And I just want to say, guys, if you ever catch me making some blatant error or leaving out some major fact, leave it in the comment section. I am not above fixing something. Second order of business, I want to say I am so sorry that I'm having to film in the bed, especially in the bedroom and in a bed, especially for a topic like this. I don't think it is ideal at all. And someone had made mention of it and I had kind of laughed at it. But you know what? It's true. It's absolutely true. It's not an ideal place to be talking about the subjects that we are talking about that. And that is what YouTube doesn't like you to talk about in the sense of abuse, and it's the abuse of the SA kind against children, no less. So yeah, the bedroom isn't the ideal place, but this is what we have, short of not doing a video at all. So if you can just imagine a green screen or imagine, that I'm not actually sitting in a bed, that would be wonderful. A lot of my research is done from The Keepers. That's a 7-hour docuseries by Ryan White, as I mentioned before, and it has something in it for everyone. It's just not for children because it deals with the abuse, which we're going to call SA, of children. So there's a trigger warning here. If this isn't the kind of thing that you can handle listening to, the abuses that have gone on systemically in the different churches, this is not for you. But The Keepers has a lot to it, a lot of different avenues, a lot of different threads that need to be gone down and tied together. You've got a true crime, you've got a whodunit that's still unsolved, you've got religious abuse, the institutional abuse of power, how the church treats whistleblowers. You think they play kindly with whistleblowers. Repressed memories, so you have a psychology angle about how repressed memories were treated back in the 70s compared to now. In a way, you could look at the DSM-3 versus the DSM-5. Possible MKUltra ties. Yeah, the umbrella of MKUltra is discussed in many of my videos, but then there were other side shoot projects that were, when MKUltra was shut down, there were still some remaining projects that are still classified, allegedly, and I think that some of this, if it is involved, is just in some of those side shoot projects that were just being covered up and just trying to hush it up. I don't think that it's still continuing today, but I think that you still have the fallout of people still being alive from some of these projects. And the reason I say that is not to be crazy, it's just that the institutions involved in this story were also involved in the MKUltra in a couple years after. So someone could have been inspired by it. Who knows? Who the heck knows? But there is something to it, believe it or not, and we will get into that. You have possible other murders, the murders of Joyce Malecki and a lot of other children in that same time period that have ties to the church or to the priest or the area. So that's something to be looked into. You have the characters that are in The Keepers that are interesting if you just want to follow up on what they're doing. The Grandma Nancy Drews, Gemma Hoskins, Ted Nugent, Abby. It's a whole thing to watch The Keepers. It's very interesting. But you have the legal issues that came out of the court cases involved in this. The questions of whether you should repeal outright or extend the statute of limitations for criminal SA, against children. So there's a whole lot to digest, and if you want, you can just go down one avenue. You could just look and see, was this a serial crime? Was this abuse? Was it just one priest or was it multiple priests? What were the nuns having to do with it? You could look at it just as the murder of Sister Cathy. So there's a whole lot of different trails to go down. And the trails may not intersect, or they might. So if this resonates with you personally and you need help, there are two avenues to go down. There's a survivors network for those abused by priests. That's called SNAP, snapnetwork.org. You can reach out to them. They will help you. There's also RAIN, RAINN. That's at www.rain.org or 1-800-656-HOPE. So that is also for anyone that's had any kind of SA. You can call them and reach out. So also for the research for this video, other than using the keepers, and that's what got me interested in it, I used the podcast, Foul Play podcast, put on by Shane Waters and Gemma. And then I also used a lot of newspaper articles. So I have a subscription service for newspapers, so I can go back as far as they've uploaded them. And I have looked at so many newspaper articles, and sometimes I've found that things contradict what's on the keepers, or I don't know, contradict themselves, and allegedly some things contradict what's in the police file. So if something seems off, that's because there's contradictory information out there. So let's start off with Sister Cathy, Catherine Ann Cesnik. She was a nun with the School Sisters of Notre Dame. All the students loved her. She taught at Archbishop Keough. That was her first teaching position. Later, she teaches at Western High School. So if you watch The Keepers, you might have been left with the impression that she was still teaching at Keough when she was murdered. She wasn't. She had been away from Keough for a few months. All right, she was teaching at Western. So in a way, she had left the school. I'll leave you to opine as to maybe why she did that. She was both an English teacher and she taught the drama club while she was at Keough. And she had been at Keough since the day they first opened their doors in 1965. So she joins the order, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, in 1960. She's teaching at Keough in 65. She took her final vows in 67. Her school, when she was working at Keough, the kids loved her. She used the Socratic method, and she also used a great sensitivity and intuition. She was very empathetic with her students, and so far nobody's had a bad word to say about Sister Cathy. In 1969, though Cathy had already taken her final vows in 1967, she was living outside the convent under exclausation. And what basically that is you're not living cloistered, and you're in civilian clothes, but you're still a nun. And at the time of her death, she was working in a public school. She was working at Western High School, teaching 11th and 12th grade, and she had left Archbishop Keough, which is later known as Seton Keough, all right, because it was named after a bishop, I do believe, and then later on, they changed the high school's name to Seton Keough. Allegedly, the mothers, Mother Maurice Kelly, gave both Sister Cathy and Sister Helen Russell Phillips, and they call her Russ. So if you hear Sister Helen or Phillips, it's Russ. Sister Helen Russell Phillips. They were given permission, allegedly, okay, because this becomes something that's questioned. They were given permission to teach in Catonsville. So Sister Russell then said, later on, I guess, in retrospect, that the order denied their request to live outside of the convent and to teach at public schools, but that they were renegades and did it anyway. So I don't know if they initially said, oh, that's not a good idea, and they just did it, and so then they were like, okay, we'll go along with this experimentation. Who knows? But Sister Cathy, she was living at the Carriage House Apartments with Sister Helen Russell Phillips. They also shared a car, a 1969 green Ford Maverick. So Sister Russell is teaching at the school across the street or right near the Carriage House Apartments, and she walked to work. And Sister Cathy would tend to use the car to drive to Western. Okay, so think, this is back in 1969. They don't have cell phones, and they're sharing a car. So try to get your mind in that mindset when this is going on, because in today's world of technology, it's hard to understand. People were away from communication sources, but they were. You know, you had a landline, and you had to get to the phone, and you had to put money in a payphone or use your landline. So think, when she goes missing, this is part of the issue. Back in July of 1969, Sister Cathy, she's at Keough. She asks permission to live outside the convent. All right, so I'm going to back it up just a little bit. And allegedly, they had said yes or no, depending on who you ask, and then they went and did it anyway. But allegedly, she had until December 31st, so that's the end of 1969, to move back or quit. So that's what looks like what happens, is they let them go for a little while because they'd done it anyway. And then she had a drop-dead deadline. Oh, no pun intended. She had a deadline, or she had to come back or quit. If you look at this big picture that Sister Cathy ends up murdered, the knowing that she'd already left Keough, all right, and she's on exclusation. She's living at Carriage House and teaching at Western. She's already more of a threat if she goes against the church, because Western is a public school. It's not a school run by the diocese. So keep this in mind. Okay, so on November 3rd, 1969, allegedly Cathy wrote a very long letter, like 5 pages longhand in small writing, you know, cursive writing, to her boyfriend, however you want to put it, Gerald Koob, a Jesuit priest. So this is 4 days before her murder. I have not read the letter, but Bob Erlinson, who is a reporter from the Baltimore Sun, he saw the morgue file, and he hand copied in his own handwriting this letter. And it's talking about how she hadn't got her period, and then she finally did, and how she was feeling kind of lonesome, and that she loved Koob and she wanted to have his children, this kind of thing. I think that they say at part in the letter, she kind of says, well, I didn't know if you were the same person I met 3 years ago. So she was reprimanding him or disappointed in him about something he had done, which I don't know what that is because we don't know the whole letter. But in essence, it was a very, I want you inside of me. I want to have your children. That's a very loving letter. So I'm leaning towards Cathy wanting to leave the church and be with Koob. Okay, so keep that in mind too. We don't know when he gets this letter because she wrote it on November the 3rd. November the 4th, Koob allegedly calls Cathy, this is what he says, all right, and tells her he'll leave the priesthood for her. So I don't know, because she wrote the letter on the 3rd, and I don't think it was mailed. I think it was on her dashboard on the 7th in the daytime. I think it got mailed later. This is my opinion. I don't know when he got a hold of that letter. I don't know if she wrote it and then saw him at some point and gave it to him. But by the 4th, he was telling her, I'll leave the priesthood for you. So I think they were coming to a crossroads in the relationship of whether they were going to get married. Now, I don't want to break into my timeline because we're talking about Sister Cathy's last days. But to give you a backstory that's very important to know, allegedly, at least 3 students had outcried to Sister Cathy that they were being abused by a priest at Archbishop Keough while she was at Keough. And then she goes to Western. So keep this in mind, all right, for her last days. There's been allegations by her students to Cathy, students that didn't know each other, students that sometimes weren't even from the same year, students that weren't sharing with each other, abuse by a certain priest there, Maskell. And allegedly she said, I'll take care of it. So this was brewing. So on November 6, 1969, a Keough student and the student's boyfriend, they go to Sister Cathy's apartment at the Carriage House. And Russ is there. Sister Helen Russell's there. And you know what they wanted to talk to Sister Cathy about? The stuff that's going on at Keough, allegedly. And who comes busting in, who comes into Sister Cathy's apartment without knocking, just opens the door and comes on in? Maskell, the accused priest, and Magnus. And allegedly Maskell was angry and Magnus looked dumb. I don't know if that be dumbfounded or what. So Maskell glares at the student, and the nuns say, you know, okay, kids, go ahead and leave, all right? And some kind of discussion obviously went on in the apartment on the 6th between the two nuns, or at least Cathy, and these two priests. So keep that in mind. So the student and her boyfriend leave. November 7th happens. No doubt Cathy was rattled. No doubt, all right? She goes to Western, driving there to school. I'm sure Sister Helen went to her school, walking across the street. And allegedly there were several pieces of unmailed letters on the dashboard. And I believe one of those letters ends up to be the ones that get mailed to her sister. All right? And I also believe one of them could have been one to be mailed to Koob. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that November 3rd letter was also one of those letters. Not sure. But she had mail on that dashboard when she went to school at Western. So she goes to Western that day, and she allegedly is talking to a student. I think her name is Juliana. And she asks the student if the student wants to go shopping with her that night, that she had a family member to buy an engagement present for, and did Juliana want to go with her? And for whatever reason, Juliana couldn't go. One wonders if Juliana had gone to shopping with Cathy that night, if this whole thing would have occurred. You just don't know. Cathy does her job. She comes home from work. Allegedly, one of Russ's friends, a student also, comes over and does see Cathy. And I guess they knew that she was going to get her paycheck cashed, because allegedly also, like, she would have checks, and she and Russell got paid every 2 weeks, and her check was for $255, and one of those checks would pay for the carriage house apartments, and I think the other ones would be for like operating expenses or something. She was cashing the checks, and so that's what she knew, that Cathy was going to go cash the check at, let me see the bank, I wrote it down, the First National Bank at 705 Frederick Avenue, and every second Friday she'd cashed her paycheck, and they stayed open late. Then after she did that, so this is at 7 o'clock at night, after she did that, she went to Muley's, and they keep talking about the Edmondson Village Shopping Center, but allegedly the Muley's in there closed before this time. So, but there was a Muley's apparently right across the street. So for all intents and purposes, she went generally to the Edmondson Village Shopping Center after she cashed her check at the National Bank. But because nobody at the Muley's in the shopping center remembered seeing her. Now, she wouldn't be in her habit, because when she worked at Western, she didn't wear a habit. She would have been in civilian clothes. But nobody remembered her seeing her at that Muley's, but there was another Muley's like literally right across the street. So regardless, she bought the Muley's buns because they end up in the car. In the keepers, there's a whole entire section about that maybe Cathy bought a necklace that had this little wedding bell and all this stuff. It's turned out that that is not applicable to Cathy's case, and that there's belief that maybe there was a bridal registry in that place she did go to get the buns. That maybe someone has a belief that she inquired into maybe getting a bridal registry set up for her sister, and that was the option she went for her engagement gift. Okay, so let's get this timeline straightened up. She leaves about 7. Some people say it was 7:30. By 8:05, okay, people are seeing that car is back in its parking spot. So think, you live in an apartment building, all right? You don't have your own spot like in a driveway. You have like your spots out in a parking lot. And people saw her car back in its spot by 8:05, because it was a quick bank, buy the buns, and she's back. Takes an hour, right? And someone in the adjoining apartment in the carriage house goes outside, and they hear a screaming argument. Now, they don't see it where it's coming from, but they hear, quote, "Keep this up and you'll be sorry, B," which, "You'll be sorry you were born." And they said it was a man's voice and a woman's voice. Also, at that same time, if you've watched The Keepers, you'll hear that one of the students from Keough got the directory and looked up where one of her teachers were. People were like, oh, that's stalking. Oh my gosh, you guys. Back in the 70s, we as kids did all kinds of crazy stuff. You'd look up where your teachers were and just go in. I mean, it was stupid, but, people did that kind of stuff. It was harmless, she wasn't stalking her teacher. She was just being a little kid looking to see, like, well, what's he doing, The directory had come out, and she looked up her teacher, and it was right by the carriage house. And so she was outside, and her and her friend were looking in, and they saw him in his undershirt or shaving or something. And so they're like, oh, there's Father Noon. They're like, oh, look at him. And they heard this booming voice, same time, about 8:05, coming from that area. So there's two different witnesses hearing that there was a loud altercation coming from the carriage house apartments, guys. 8:05. Cathy's car was spotted by more than one witness back in its parking spot. That's the important thing I left out, and I do apologize because it's important to know for the timeline. So this is when I think that Cathy was essentially carjacked, for lack of a better term, except for the car wasn't what they were after. It was having a conversation with her was what they were after. And they probably didn't want to have it in front of Sister Russell. This is my speculation. So they shoved her over into the passenger seat and drove off because another person said, well, I thought I saw the car with a woman trying to get out of the passenger, like trying to get out of the car in the passenger seat. So that's what looked like what happened. She made it back to the apartment complex. She didn't make it back into the apartment. The reason why we know she didn't make it back into the apartment is because the Muley's buns didn't make it back into the apartment. You have fresh hot buns, the buns box there, it's got the little tie ribbon around it. It never makes it back into the apartment. So she never actually physically made it back into the apartment. But she made it back into the parking lot. So whoever took her either drove there to have a conversation with her, she wasn't back yet, and they waited for her to return. And when she did, they came over and said, hey, what are you doing? You don't know what you're getting yourself into, B. You're going to be regretting the day you were born. Probably because she was going to tattle on one of the priests about what was going on at the school. And so they decided to, have a little chit-chat with her, or worse. So then 10 o'clock rolls around in the carriage house. And Sister Helen Russell Phillips said later, convent habits die hard. We didn't stay out after 10 o'clock. And so what happens is Sister Russell doesn't know why Cathy hasn't come back to the carriage house. So what she does, and this is very important, this witness has come forward. Her name is Sharon Hamel-Bush. And I'll call her an outcry for the fact that there wasn't a pre-conspiracy. Because she is called from Russ, and because she had been there earlier that day. And she says, Russ says to her, have you seen Cathy? And she's like thinking, well, Cathy's not my friend. I haven't seen Cathy. And so Russell says, I think I should call the police and Koob and Pete. So Russell's telling this person, well, Cathy's not back yet. I'm worried. I think I should call her boyfriend, allegedly, and the guy he's with, probably his friend, his Jesuit friend. So understand here that Sister Russell, she doesn't have a car. She doesn't have the car to go out and just search for Cathy. Someone isn't home, you get in your car and go look for him. And there's no cell phones at the time, so she's sitting there. She has no way to search for herself short of calling the police. And so this alone right here, reaching out to Cathy or to Sharon Hamel-Bush, before calling the police, before getting Koob and McKeon involved, proves that at this point there isn't a cover-up on the part of Sister Russell. She's just like looking, where's Cathy at? Now she could be thinking in her mind, oh my gosh, those priests came in and they could have probably threatened them, and then Cathy went off to school and she came back from school and she just went off for this simple errand, but now it's 10. She left at 7-ish. Now it's 10, where the heck is Cathy? So let me call my friend to see. Now, you're not going to call your friend if you're starting a big, huge cover-up. Just saying. That's probably not the thing you're going to do, because this person came out later. Now, if it had been part of the cover-up, the person would have come off right away, because it would have been part of the cover-up. So just keep that in mind for the people who want to say that she was in it from the very beginning. By midnight, Sister Russell's had enough waiting around. She calls Gerald Koob, the Jesuit boyfriend, and then Koob and Pete McKeon hurry to the carriage house. Once they get there, and I'm going to get into this a little deeper in another section, but the police are called at 1 when Pete McKeon, Gerald Koob, and Russell Phillips are at the carriage house to report Cathy as a missing person. They report her missing. It's filed out as a missing person. They haven't found the car yet. So essentially they sit around there for between 1 to 4, and then on some report I read it said 4:40. So that's almost 4 hours sitting around. What in the world do you think they were talking about? But we'll get into that later. Cathy's missing. People are wondering, where is she? Where is she? The next day, Sharon Hamel Bush, the same one that was talked to the day before and that had come over, she comes back to the carriage house apartments, and one of the police detectives allegedly questioned her in front of Sister Russell. Now, I think it's a small apartment. You've got Koob there. You've got McKeon there. You've got detectives wandering around. And standing there in the living room, according to her, with Russ standing there, the detective in a trench coat asked her, did anyone at Keough do anything to you that you didn't want? And she stopped and she's thinking, well, yeah, boy kissed me once. And he was like, oh, that's not what we're talking about. Now, note that the detective didn't say, did anything happen to you at Western? No, he knew Keough. The detective knew to ask that something was awry at Archbishop Keough and that this student needed to be asked if she knew anything about it. That tells me right there. The detective that next day knew there was something awry at Keough going on with the priests and the students. Now, who told him that? Did he know that from a previous file or from a previous outcry? Or did he know that from Russell? I suspect that Russell sat down and told him. Now, were McKeon and Koob not in the room? Were they going la 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 la? But usually if someone was to say that, you would say, sir, what are you talking about? None of this happened. This is the next damn morning. So that tells you somebody told the detective something about what was going on with the essay going on at the school. Again, let's reinforce, allegedly at this point, 3 different victims, at least 3, had confided in Sister Cathy about the essay going on at Keough at the hands of Father Maskell. Again, I want to bring up the fact that Father Maskell was only 3 years older than Cathy. He was not, I guess when I first watched it, I saw him as like this older figure in a way, and this young nun. No, they only had 3 years difference between them. So that's even more of a reason, like she would almost view him as a peer in a way. Yes, he's the man, and how they treated women, nuns versus priests, but in a way he was her peer. And in a way, I don't think she feared him terribly. At least not initially. I think she was brave enough to stand up for those kids. Just want to note that Sister Helen Russell later went on to become a public school teacher, so she noped out of this whole situation. Wonder why, right? So that was Cathy's last days. And I'm going to talk about all these different sections in a different way than the Keeper. I want to dive deep into what I have been able to find in the newspaper reports and in what people have given as interviews, and hopefully shed a little more light on this. So let's talk about Father Anthony Joseph Maskell. Father A. Joseph Maskell abused children, both boys and girls, at many locations. He was ordained in 1965. His half-brother Joseph, yes, another Joseph, Tommy Maskell. That's why you have 2 Joes, because it was his half-brother. That's why they have 2 Joes in that family as sons. So Tommy was a Baltimore police officer and was later wounded on duty. I believe that was in 1964. And when you do searches for him on, say, newspapers.com, you will find a lot about the brother's wounding. He was a hero officer. And he was on duty when he was wounded, and what it did was it ended his career. So I just want to note that by 1964, Maskell's half-brother is out of the police department. Now, does this mean that he didn't have access? Absolutely not, because of all his ties. It's a police family. He's, the National Guard chaplain. He's the police chaplain. He's the chaplain for everybody having any kind of authority in that area. So he is very tied in. But to assume that the brother had some kind of involvement, that does not bear out, because by 1964, the brother is out of the police department because he was wounded. Sometimes they don't really bring that up, but that's an important thing to note. Maskell's only, like I said, 3 years older than Sister Cathy, and a former altar boy, one that was not allegedly abused, was one of the early altar boys serving for Father Maskell, expressed what a gun nut Father Maskell was. Father Maskell would put a gun on the altar sometimes. I mean, this guy was a gun freak. So just keep that in mind. This was not your usual typical father. Even, and I'm going off script here, but even where Scannell, the police later captain or whatever, but that's in the Keepers, he vouches for Father Maskell. If you go through the newspapers.com of back in the time, he's vouching for Father Maskell left, right, and backwards. So of course, once Maskell comes, is accused of all these dastardly deeds, you're going to certainly back him up. But then, also there's proof that you'd backed him up before and that you'd shown yourself to be his friend. So just FYI, he was known to be a gun nut. That is not a question. That's not something these victims made up out of their minds. He was a gun nut. Let's go through his timeline really quick, all right? 1965 to 1966, he was at the Sacred Heart of Mary in Baltimore. 1966, he was living at St. Clement in Lansdowne. Now remember, Lansdowne is going to figure important, so think Lansdowne. All right, keep that word in your mind. Maskell was the associate pastor there. He lived there, and he also did a Boy Scout camp. What pies did he not have his fingers in? 1967 in St. Clement, he's living in the rectory and allegedly abusing children in his rooms. Franz, who is the altar boy, another one, tells his friends that Maskell's a pervert because Maskell starts messing with him. And I will get into him as a victim separately and what he says, all right? But I'm just giving you an overview here. Charles, after saying, he's a pervert, gets back to Maskell and he tosses Charles off the sports teams. Starts kind of giving him pushback for for fighting him back, for pushing back on his abuses. So what happens in 1967, Charles Franz tells his mother, and the mother goes and raises hell at the Archdiocese, and so they move Maskell. So Maskell's already been moved before all this crap starts with Sister Cathy and the later abuse that outcries at Keough with the girls. Maskell's already been moved, guys. He has already been moved for abusing a boy. You think that was the only boy he abused? 1968. He's living at St. Clemens still. But what they do is they transfer him, his day job gets moved to Keough. All right? The girls' school. Now you got to think, if you're the Catholic school, and this is me speculating, guys, Catholics, I'm speculating. When you're going to move a priest from doing naughty things to boys, what's the easiest thing to do? Oh, let's move him to the girls' school. Guys, the crime of rape, the abuse, the act of RAPE, gosh, YouTube hates real talk. It's a thing of power. It's really not about sex. It's about power. And so sometimes to some folks, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. And that's another thing people need to learn. And that's maybe another thing we need to discuss as a society. Because people that RAPE, especially kids, they don't always care about the sex of the child. Keep in mind. So that's a bad on the church. They moved him to an all-girls school. It didn't stop. Also, just as a parallel in this timeline, in 72, Maskell gets his master's degree in psychology from Towson State. Allegedly, throughout his history as being a student, he wants to get his doctorate in psychology, but allegedly the Archdiocese didn't want to pay for him to get his doctorate. This is what one of his friends finds out by asking around later. So just FYI, he's got his master's degree in psychology. How much better is it to abuse people when you know how to get in their brains to do so? From 1968 to 1975, he's at Archbishop Keough. 1975 to 1980, he's at the Archdiocese Division of Schools, whatever that means. Allegedly, he's at the Archdiocese headquarters, shaping the curriculum and management for the Baltimore Catholic schools. Then, 1980 to 1982, he's at the Church of the Annunciation. In 1982, Maskell's now in the school counseling program at Johns Hopkins. So this might be where he's trying to go forward towards his doctorate, and that they're like the diocese is like, nah. I don't know why that is. The Archdiocese would likely know in their files that we're never going to see. 1982 to 1992 has his longest stretch. He's at the Holy Cross Parish, which will feature in a big, important event. So let's say, Holy Cross. Let's keep a little note. Holy Cross. What happened there? So 10 years he's there. And then in 1992, this is the time that the first witness, Jane Doe at that time, outcried. And Maskell denied it. I'm going to get into all this deeply, so I'm just giving you a timeline. Archbishop Keeler, he suspended Maskell's priestly functions, and Maskell was sent to a psychiatric hospital in Connecticut for a psych eval. So initially they're like, look, we're going to look into this. They sent him off. Now you got to think, they know in their files, if their files were kept properly, all right? Seemingly they know they've already transferred him once. And now there's someone coming forward, mind you, 2 decades after the fact, saying, hey, he did this to me while I was at Keough. Now, wouldn't you really maybe that's why they went ahead and sent him, because they knew that he'd already been transferred once. Just saying. And I'm saying once. If you look, he's already been bounced around. Who knows what happened at the Church of Annunciation? Who knows what happened at Holy Cross? Who knows what happened at the Archdiocesan Division of Schools? Who knows? October 1992 to April 1993, he's at the Institute of Living in Connecticut at the cost of $900 per day for residential evaluation. Let that sink in when we later talk about the piddly payoffs given to proven abuse victims. Eventually, the Institute of Living in Connecticut allegedly finds no psychological or sexual abnormalities, and he is sent forth to work at St. Augustine Church in Elkridge in April of 1993. Jane Doe has already started an outcry, and the outcry, guys, keep this in mind. Sometimes the keepers made this clear, but I don't think it's crystal clear to the folks that Jane Doe was going through the church with her problems. She was trying to work through the church. They give you a church lawyer. You're working with church lawyers on both sides. This thing didn't hit the press and blow up until things went awry with the negotiations with the negotiations. Had that gone well, and I say that with sarcasm, she probably would have got a nice fat check and no one would have ever known about it. These other victims would have never come forward. They might have come forward on their own later. Who knows? But by 1994, because of the fact that things were going so poorly in the mediations, then the lawsuit. She gets her own real attorney that is fighting for her, not for her and the church, and this is my opinion. Because if the church is paying for both the attorneys, how well is that going to go down? So she gets her own attorney, and then all of a sudden, all this information comes forth because that firm did their job. Then you have a lawsuit going on by 1994. And so what does Maskell do? What does this good, innocent priest do? He lambs it to Ireland. He bolts to Ireland, Wexford, Ireland. And then what do you think happens? Now we're hearing mutterings that there was some shenanigans going on in Ireland. Yeah, I know. So by 1998, we know that he was back here in Maryland at Stella Maris Timonium in Maryland, and that's essentially where you can go and spend your final days in the pasture. And it's something else to me that you could essentially have all your duties taken away from you about, doing the sacrament and doing anything in public, but yet you're still taking brilliant care of under guard and having all your needs taken care of by the church in your last hours, no matter what the hell you did to kids. Oh, sorry, rant off. So during his tenure, Maskell, his tenure throughout his time, especially at Keough, he was the chaplain for the state police. Okay, chaplain for the state police. Think what that involves. If a police officer needs a chaplain, they're going and crying to him, and a family member was killed, or they were injured on the job. Do you understand how important that job is and what kind of bonding results there? He's the chaplain for the Baltimore police, the state police, and the Baltimore police, the Maryland National Guard. All these positions of authority has this fellow as the chaplain. He's going to come and do your ceremonies. He's going to be the one. I'm sure he'd take their confession if they wanted. So I just want to let you know how many pies this guy had his finger in. Perhaps due to his work with the police and his brother's longtime tenure with the local Baltimore police, Maskell enjoyed a great relationship with the police. All right, this is pretty much undeniable. You have Skinnell vouching for him left, right, and backwards, and saying, yeah, if we knew anything, he would have been locked up, da-da-da-da. Maskell's doing ride-alongs with the police. Ride-alongs. Why does Maskell need to be doing a ride-along? So he's got his master's degree in psychology from Towson State University. This is me doing a wrap-up of the timeline I just gave you. So he also has a degree in counseling from Loyola. That's essentially like a teaching counseling. So what? So he can be guidance counselors for these students? I mean, the mind boggles. So finally he got a certificate in advanced studies and counseling from Johns Hopkins. So he was trying to go through and get his psychology doctorate in psychology. But allegedly the Archdiocese wasn't going to pay for his doctorate. Again, I don't know if that was because he had already stepped on too many toes at this time. I'm not sure. So Maskell did not have his degree in psychology. This is very important to know because he was not legally able to administer these tests that he gave to the students at Archbishop Keough and wherever else he gave them. So I just want to note this. This was illegal. What he was doing was illegal. He did not have the right to be given those tests. He did not have the credentials to be doing that. So this is what he was doing, guys. I've summed it up and said, oh, he was abusing students. But let me give you his MO, all right? He used the confessional and his role as the guidance counselor and all his other roles, to sound out the girls or anyone, to gather information about them and their families, to get them in compromising positions. And also, let me note that he had his own personal confidential secretary. We don't even know if she was paid through the church, because she was paid in cash. So now I don't even know if that was an official thing. Like, I don't even know if he did that for her on the side, for Lillian Hughes to come and be typing out all his stuff, all his little infos, that he would gather. Yeah, he was gathering like compromise, essentially, against people in the confessional, and then using it against them when it suited them, or suited him, or just gathering it, to know, oh, well, this person's father's an alcoholic, and this person's mother, has a disabled son, and he would figure out which girls were vulnerable. And then when he felt like it, he took advantage of that. This is the kind of monster he was. Like I said, he used the confessional to assess the at-risk children, those who were already traumatized by abuse and whose parental figures were unwilling or unable to help them. And he would give the students, the victims, also cups of tea or Coke when they would come to his office. And commonly they didn't feel so well. So it's believed that he was drugging them. He'd get them comfortable in his office. He would darken the room. He commonly used the Rorschach. They always talk ink blots. That's the Rorschach test. What is this chuckle-headed priest doing, giving these children Rorschach tests? And commonly, if you look at those tests and you look at the common answers, because I've taken abnormal psychology, many people have probably know a little bit about different psychological tests. People commonly see things like bats and the like. But he would, when they said the normal response, like, oh, I think that's a bat, he would say, oh, no, that's people having sex. That's a vagina. That's a this, that, or the other, some sexual thing. And it would prod them. So normal range answers, like bats or animals, seeing those in the ink blots, he would insist that the ink blots were sexual. And, he would challenge the girls. He would give them psychological tests. Like whatever ones he could get his hands on, he would give them psychological tests. And what that does is reveal people's greatest fears, their greatest weaknesses. And what he would do, like I said, he would keep his office darkened. He would allow the girls to lay on the couches. He used hypnosis techniques. He would use a pocket watch sometimes. He was just having his way with these children. And some victims have come forth who didn't know each other, didn't know each other's stories, and they said that he took compromising photographs, Polaroids of them. And then sometimes they didn't even know it until the next time they would balk against something he wanted them to do, and then he would show them these photographs of themselves having these horrible things done to them by him, by others, and then they were compromised. And a lot of times once that the photographs were on the table, then he just did what he wanted to do. He didn't even need the hypnosis anymore because he had them over a rock and a hard place. This is a Catholic school. The kind of stuff he was doing to them allegedly doing to them in these photographs, if that ever got out, they wouldn't probably want to live. They wouldn't want their parents to see it and the whole 9 yards. This is the kind of stuff he was doing. And you could argue that, oh, well, show me the proof. Well, the proof is in the Holy Cross stick. And we'll get to that. He took select girls to the gynecologist and to doctors. Yes, he did. And this is backed up not only by the girls, some of the girls have the doctor's records. Dr. Christian Richter was a gynecologist that ends up being sued by Jane Roe in the lawsuit. And she had records. And he even admitted, yes, Maskell referred girls to me. And, I was there. Obviously, he was the doctor. And that Maskell was there in the room in loco parentis. That means like acting as their parents. Who does that? That is not his place. That is not his role. And sometimes he even took them to doctors to get them medicated. He would say, oh, it was the 70s. 69, 70s, they dropped acid. Then he would say, oh, they're schizophrenic. And he'd get them put on lithium to better manipulate and abuse them. I kid you not. This is what this creature was doing. And it also turned out that there was a Dr. William Irvin and a Dr. Helvig. They were in some practice called Psychology Associates. I need to research that. I don't know what Helvig's involvement is 100%, but I know that Dr. William Irving was a psychologist that visited Keough 3 hours a week. And I think he pretty much took his marching orders from Maskell and it's probably where Maskell got his psychological tests. I think that he was inspired by Irvin and was getting his tests from them and learning things. Like Dr. Christian Richter, when he took the girls to Dr. Christian Richter, the gynecologist, who later he admitted that, yes, Maskell brought girls to his office, referrals, that he stayed in the office observing the exams. Some of the girls allegedly also said that Richter had given them abortions. They were always checking the girls to see if they were pregnant because they were being abused. SA was going on. So, of course, you need to check to see if the girls are pregnant because who else is having SA with them other than these priests and who was brought along? It wasn't just Maskell. This is a horrible thing to wrap your mind around. But allegedly this Dr. Helvig that was an associate with Dr. Irvin, who was coming to the school 3 hours a week, one victim alleges that Dr. Helvig used desensitization techniques on her, like rubbing her and asking her suggestive questions because she was, I don't know if she was frigid or uptight or what the story was, but he was trying to loosen her up, and that is so inappropriate. You do not use your body to desensitize another young underage girl, especially without her parents' permission. This is just allegedly, but this kind of stuff is going on. There's some records. This isn't just coming from left field. Father Maskell, again, he was not legally authorized to do any of these things. He was supposed to be a simple guidance counselor. He was giving psychological tests, acting in loco parentis with many of these girls. Many of these girls mention his love of guns, but guess what? There's a long storied history of his love of guns. He commonly used the gun to drive home his threats to the students that if they were to tell anyone about the abuse at his hands, that he would kill them, he would kill their family, he would kill their dogs. They were totally terrorized. And he also would give them post-hypnotic suggestions to many of them to suppress their memories, and also essentially told a few of them that if they told anyone, they would have to kill themselves. They would have to kill themselves. So that's the kind of lovely things he was putting into their mind. And also, just to add proof to this, once Maskell landed it to Ireland, guess what they found in his rectory? Guns. In retrospect, Dr. Maskell's friend and mentor, Dr. Lee Richmond, from Loyola, she was one of the folks that were with him whenever he was doing his later age degrees, and she alleges she didn't know his true character. She said that Maskell took over the counseling program at Loyola, and I want to follow up with that to find out what years that was, what that was like with the students. Was he involved with students? What the heck? So Dr. Lee Richmond knew him as a student. He was an older student at Hopkins, and she developed a friendship with him probably like 1980 and onward. And she said she only saw his true character towards the end of his life once the lawsuits were coming through. And she said she saw him and he had some papers that he was looking at, some documents that alleged this horrific essay. Like the horrific details of the essay was on this paper. And she said, to him, how can you be involved in this? Is it moral? And his answer to her was allegedly yes. Maskell dies in 2001, and in 2017, his body was exhumed for DNA to compare it against the DNA that's later uncovered in Sister Cathy Cesnik's case. It's not a match. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that Father Maskell had no involvement in her murder, in her case. It just means that he was not the one smoking a cigarette in the back seat or threw a cigarette in the back seat of her car the day that she was murdered. That's all that means. Well, let's talk about now the victims. We've talked about Sister Cathy's last days. We've talked about Father Maskell. And now I want to talk about some of the victims, and to kind of maybe put some of the victims in order. So, because the Keepers wasn't necessarily the best with putting them in order of their outcry. So let's give it a shot. First, let me say this to you. If you're watching this and you said when you're watching the Keepers, well, I just don't believe so-and-so. And I just don't believe that person. I don't like the repressed memories or the covered memory concept. Do you realize that there are dozens upon dozens of victims, and that there are only a few that were willing to go on television, mainly because they'd already been through a lawsuit, and that these folks didn't know each other and they have overlapping stories told to somebody in confidence that didn't know the other people are telling it? It's Bill Cosby 2.0, where everybody comes out of the woodwork and they all have the same kind of story and they haven't put their heads together. It's Weinstein 2.0, 3.0. So what I'm trying to say is there's no perfect victim. There's very rarely a time that there's a perfect victim that you can't pick apart, that you can't find fault with. But in the totality of all the victims and the commonality of what they're saying and the time period and the fact that he was moved around by the church. You know, so what? You don't believe one victim? What about the other 100? That's just what I have to say. So I get it. Sometimes a victim story it mutates. It isn't 100%. Move on to the next victim. There's plenty of them to believe with records. So that's what I have to say about the perfect victim. Dr. Charles Franz, he was an altar boy at St. Clement, and Father Joseph Maskell. So this is before he ever went to Keough. Father Joseph Maskell took Charles Franz and placed him in charge of the other altar boys. It's 1966. Charles is in 8th grade. He used Charles's confessions to gauge Charles's sexual interests and his guilt, things that he'd done, things that he was felt guilty about. He starts giving him rides home from Mass, calling Charles out of class 2 to 3 times a week, going, hold on to your balls, and like grabbing his crotch whenever they go over like a speed bump, grooming him. And, the kid's like, 13 years old, and he's asking this child about sex, plying him with altar wine, soda in a coffee or a cup, starting to sound familiar, and showing Charles how to pleasure himself. Yeah. So this outcry happens in April of 1967 when Charles begins to tell his classmates about Maskell being a pervert, which of course gets back to Maskell. And so Maskell retaliates, quit talking about me, you little MFer, or you won't graduate. And so the more Charles gets truculent, the more Maskell retaliates, kicking him off all the sports teams and stuff. And Charles has also reported that how Maskell and the Baltimore County Police allegedly, and people were like, oh, it's the brother. No, the brother was already retired by this time. He couldn't work. So the Baltimore County Police allegedly would crash the lovers' lanes in order to embarrass the girls and making them get out of the cars. You know what I mean? Like enjoying that. And Charles saw this and heard about this all the time from Maskell. This is just the kicks he got. And so once Charles had enough, it was May 1967, he tells his mother about all these things that are going on, about what Maskell had been doing, and his mother either A, marched up there or telephoned the Archdiocese, either one. It worked. She reported Maskell. He said, I told my mother what he was doing to me, and she went down to the Archdiocese headquarters and complained. So Maskell, what did they do? Did they get rid of this guy? What do you think they did? No, he was sent to Keough. He was moved out of St. Clement's where he slept and, was at keeping residence. And they moved his day job over to Keough, but left him there to slink around St. Clement's when he wanted to. And I guess there was a Father Jack C. Collopy, Collopy, I'm not sure, Collopy, who let Charles back onto all the teams because Maskell was out for all intents and purposes. And so Collopy lets Charles back on the team. So he's aware of it, and then he becomes a Monsignor Collopy. Later, when Charles becomes a dentist, he has Monsignor Collopy as a patient. And he tells Dr. Franz that he's sorry, that he had complained to the Archdiocese on Charles's behalf, and that allegedly the Archdiocese threatened his pension if he didn't stay silent. This is an allegation. It's out there. What's in your files, Archdiocese? What did Collopy say when y'all moved Father Maskell? They don't have anything in the file about this. Why did you move Father Maskell? I'm curious. Collopy, apologized to Dr. Franz. He was his client, probably doing his teeth, and he's like, I'm really sorry. He said he was terribly sorry, but that when he tried to alert his superiors at the AOB that Maskell was abusing students, they responded by threatening to take his pension away if he didn't remain silent. So what did they do? They moved him to Keough. So Maskell, he's moved to an all-girls school. They probably thought, okay, not sure about this thing with this boy. Let's put him in an all-girls school. He'll be fine there. What do you think happened there? You know what happened there. It's a power move. Those things he's doing are power moves. And you know what? I don't want to know about Maskell's childhood. At this point, I don't want to know what made him what the monster he was. I don't want to know. I want to talk about the victims. Okay, so let's talk about one of the first ones. It wasn't some of the ones that were like, oh, I don't believe her. We have Kathleen Susan Hoback, Keough, December 1968. Cathy Susan Hoback. And I hope these victims don't mind that I'm bringing their names up, but they're in the public eye. They've been on the Keepers or they've been on podcasts, said their names, so that's why I'm bringing them up. If you have any issues, drop me a comment, send me a message, and I'll remove it. So she tells Sister Cathy, because they shared an interest in guitar. Sister Cathy played guitar, Cathy played guitar, and she shared that Father Maskell was not religious. And Cathy queried, like, what do you mean? So after further questioning by Cathy, Miss Hoback tells Sister Cathy that he gets a little physical with me in his office. I think she said that, if I remember correctly, that Sister Cathy said that she was like surprised, but her face wasn't surprised. So what Sister Cathy began to do is to protect Miss Hoback. Whenever she was called out, come to, Father Maskell's office, come to Father Maskell's office, she would be like, oh no, Cathy's already, she's in study, she can't get away, she's already gone home, she can't get away. So Sister Cathy protected student Cathy. I think by December of 68, Sister Cathy's being told, uh-oh, something's going on with these girls. So then we have Anonymous. Allegedly, this is the time period Anonymous reaches out to Sister Cathy. We do not know exactly what they told Sister Cathy, except for the fact that Father Maskell had been abusing her, allegedly, and she was the one that then later went to the carriage house apartments with her boyfriend, probably to give her some follow-up, and then they burst in, and we know what happened there. So Anonymous then reports. So the next witness is Jane Doe, the one that some folks have trouble believing just because of the repressed memories, is Jean Marie Hargidon. Married name is Wenner. And she outcried in May of 1969. She was building up to it because Sister Cathy had seen her looking dazed outside in the hall, outside the office, after having been abused by Maskell, and she didn't know where to go. And Sister Cathy was like, where do you need to be? And she's like, I just don't know. So then she found out what classroom Jean needed to be in and put her in there, and then also queried Father Maskell, like, I didn't know Jeannie needed these services. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's going real well. And she was just like, what? So by this time, she's suspicious in my mind. And so I think it was one of the last days of school that she asked, well, how are you liking it here? And she's like, I don't like it. And Sister Cathy said, why? And she didn't want to say. And so Sister Cathy literally pulled it out of her. And she said, is it the priest? And she nodded, really, sadly and solemnly, that it's the priest that's, hurting you. And Sister Cathy said, oh my God, I suspected as much. And she tells Jean, May 1969, to have a good summer and that she would take care of it. And I believe she tried to take care of it. Jean outcried to Sister Cathy while she was still at Keough. And keep in mind, in 1992, Jean is the one that goes to the Archdiocese in Baltimore about the memory it started coming up for her. And she tried to go through with the church to reconcile that, and it hit an impasse. And finally, by 1994, when a lawsuit happened, dozens upon dozens of men, or of men and women, came forward to say they had been abused by this creature back in those time period. If you don't believe her because of the repressed memories that weren't tweezed out of her by a psychiatrist, by the way, a lot of the repressed memories that we all know about, we've heard so much about, that were false memory syndrome, a lot of that was tweezed out with hypnosis and with pulling it out by psychiatrists and people making suggestions. This is not the case with her. Just saying. Look into it. Study your victim if you don't believe the victim. Now, did Jean remember things? She was told to keep a dream diary. So she would do these dreams and write things down. And then she would sometimes write bullshit, like things that she was like, that didn't happen. That's not right. So that people really love to pick her apart. I'm not going to. I'm going to go ahead and take her at her word. Let's go on to the next witness that has some documentation and that who was not got a lot of folks not believing her. If all these people come forward and say the same thing and you don't believe one of them, do you then not believe any of them? Come on. Teresa Lancaster, she's also known as Jane Roe in the Jane Doe lawsuit. She attended Archbishop Keough between, I think, 68 and 72. She was abused by Father Maskell. In spring of 1970, her junior year, she and her friend Linda thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the priest because of some drug use. Apparently, her parents had found some pot and some paraphernalia in her purse, and they were losing their mind, and she had always been taught to go to the priest and to help and to get him to realize that everything's going to be fine, talk to her parents. So she went to speak with Father Maskell to hear her confession due to this, and what he did was he used her confession against her, and within, 5 minutes, had her manipulated and doing horrible things to her. Within 5 minutes, he was abusing her because he knew he had her over a barrel, that her parents were very worried about her, and that now he had yet another easy victim. He claimed he can only help girls if he has contact with them. Over time, Father Maskell also took Teresa to a Dr. Christian Richter. Their files, guys, their files on this. And he was sued. And he admitted that he had referrals from Maskell. There's letters thanking Father Maskell for the referral. Admitted that Maskell was in the room when he did her gyne exams. Father Maskell undertook her gynecological care. And Father Maskell also had her see Dr. Irvin for psychological testing. Again, that was the doctor that would come to Keough 3 times a week, allegedly. And when she was not submissive, allegedly Dr. Maskell would threaten her with Montrose, which was an institute for bad girls. I haven't researched Montrose yet, but I guess it was someplace that nobody wanted to go because he would commonly threaten these victims with Montrose, like I'll send you to Montrose. So I don't know if it was a mental facility or a juvie place, but it apparently was pretty bad because everybody would freak out when they were heard of that threat. So Teresa starts out crying to other students at that time. She was telling her friends, all and sundry, that he was a pervert, to stay away from him. Very similar to Charles. Like telling the friends, don't, stay away from him. He's a pervert. But who wants to say he's putting guns in orifices? You know what I mean? No one wants to explain that to your friends, but you will say, hey, he's a pervert, stay away from him. So Teresa and a friend, Linda Whitney Prescott, were both abused by Father Maskell and police because Father Maskell took her and Linda on a police run, Halloween 1970, and allowed some police to abuse them. And it's just horrible because a lot of these people that came forward didn't know anything about the other stories, but then you have this overlapping about this police runs and the police and all these different folks, and it's very disconcerting how there's a lot of overlap. Then you have Lillian Hughes, who wasn't abused because she seemingly had a strong family. Maskell would assess who was a good victim and who wasn't, but he would use her to write all these type up all these notes from his meetings and these psychological testings and almost like putting the compromise down in some kind of format. Maybe he would then go through it and see what he could leverage. Who knows what he did with those documents that he had typed up. But what happened was Teresa tried to reach out to Father Magnus for help to get Father Maskell away from her. She says, I asked Father Magnus in 1970 if he would be my counselor because I was being sexually abused by Father Maskell, but Father Magnus said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Try to stay away from him. And he shut the door in her face. To say that nobody knew would just be a lie. It was a lie. how she gets involved is by 1994, when Jane Doe isn't getting anywhere with her mediation, and then gets a real attorney to start the ball rolling against suing all these different entities. Jane, she gets a letter saying, hey, if anybody went to Archbishop and somebody did something inappropriate with you, and everybody has the same person that they name. There was many people at Archbishop Keough, but everybody comes, Maskell, 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 Maskell. Letters come flooding in, and people join the lawsuit. And Jane Roe, who had actual documentation, joined the lawsuit. So that's how she got involved. And, you know, I just want to say again, a lot of this overlap of different witnesses confirming things they didn't even know that they were confirming. Lillian Hughes' account of being Maskell's confidential secretary and taking notes on Maskell's, taking the girls to the gynecologist. I mean, it just reinforces things. And then we have another witness that some folks have doubted. Again, it's another case of you don't have a perfect victim here. You're not going to have a perfect victim that's been drugged, okay? Donna Wallace Vandenbosch went to Keough. She made her outcry about Father Maskell to Sister Judith, allegedly, who saw Maskell's arms around her, and Sister Judith denied it. So let's say that. Sister Judith denied it. Allegedly, she knew about things that were going on at St. Clement with Maskell. I guess they were having parties at the rectory and the police were there. And she saw some Polaroid snapshots to know that, you know, maybe these priests weren't all they were supposed to be. And that September 1970, she went to a picnic, a church picnic. And Magnus and Maskell, well, she was drugged with a soda. And they took advantage of her, allegedly. And so the fact, I think she's told the story and actually said it was Maskell and a police officer, and then later said it was Magnus. I think that has caused people not to believe her, but I think she was abused more than once. So who knows if you know, she just misspoke or they ran together in her mind. I'm not sure. Sometimes when people ask you questions in a deposition, it's like one incident after another. So who's to say? But they tried to say that things are not consistent. I'm not sure. But long story short is she was out crying in the sense that she'd be in Spanish class and we'd get the notification overhead to come to his office, and she'd throw a freaking fit, you know, like, don't make me go, he's a, you know, don't make me go, hysterical. And they would be like, he's a weirdo, but you've got to go. She was out crying all the years post Keough as well. So this was not a recovered memory for her either. So people who want to say, oh, I don't believe the recovered memories, okay, then you don't believe essentially one of the witnesses. Let's believe all the other ones. How about, no, this wasn't a student, but Sister Mary Florida, and I think she also, her non-Christian name is Marian Weller. She was known as Sister Mary Florida, and she was questioned allegedly by the Baltimore County Police Department in mid-1990s. And they allegedly told her in questioning her, quote, we know the priest was involved in Sister Cathy's murder, and we know it happened because she was about to report the sex abuse at the school. Now, I don't know if they came and said that to her allegedly to try to get her to agree and say, yeah, this is what I know, like break her ice. But apparently that's what she said, that she knew. It's crazy. It really is crazy. Here's another victim. There's tons of victims, but not all of them have come forward because people criticize them. People doubt them, and then people try to tear them apart because they're not a perfect victim. Here's another one. Not in the Keepers, all right? This is one from the podcast. Her name is Cindy Lovell. She went to Keough. She endured a 1.5 years of abuse. She had mononucleosis before this started, so she started using the elevator. And I caught it once off of a Coke, and it literally put me out for 2 weeks. I was out of school. I was weak. It was horrible. I caught it off a Coke, okay? A Coke can. Someone drank after me. Or I drank after someone that had it, and then, yeah, it was not good. So Maskell saw that she was using the elevator because it was near his office, and he wanted to know why she was so weak. And she confided to him that she had mono, and then he, tried to say, oh, you must be sexually active. It's a kissing disease. So he gives her a tea or a Coke, again, drugging. She's 13 years old. And he's like asking her if she's sexually active, and he starts testing her with the Rorschach, again, with the ink blots, and he thinks he's a doctor of psychology. I mean, all these different people coming forward with the same kind of story. It's Weinstein 2.0. He starts doing like this, shoulder massaging and groping her and saying he's doing God's work. He puts the gun on the table once she starts resisting. I mean, it's the same story over and over again. Later, he brings out incriminating Polaroids on another occasion that he'd taken while she was apparently drugged to the point she didn't know things were going on. And then he's showing her these photographs, and she's just like totally at his mercy now, because he's got all the evidence to make her look like a bad person. And, he starts threatening her because he knows about her family situation, that her brother will go to foster care because her father was allegedly an alcoholic. He tells her, you're a bad person, there's a lot of work to be done. And, what he was doing, this essay, was God's work in order to, make her a better person. Maskell brought in Father Magnus and his police buddies with this one. Yeah, another one that drags in Father Magnus. Now, if you go and look at the site where they've reported that the church has admitted that the priests have been bad boys, I don't think you see Magnus on there. You see Maskell on there, and I've got to wonder why the hell Magnus isn't on there too. So anyway, he told Cindy's parents, Maskell told Cindy's parents, that she had a brain tumor in order to discount her if she was to ever tell. The sickness knows no ends. Make them look schizophrenic. Say that they've got a brain tumor. So if they ever come forth with any kind of crazy story, well, it must be her brain tumor, poor thing. She doesn't mean anything she's saying. So Cathy allegedly outcried to Sister Judith. Yet another one that claims that Sister Judith was told, and Sister Judith said, I don't believe you. And then what Sister Judith did was turn around and told Father Maskell. Well, thanks, Sister Judith. Thank you so much for your help. I mean, this is allegedly. This is what she says. I think Sister Judith has a lot to answer for, in my opinion. This is my opinion due to what the witnesses have said. Okay? So don't come for me. Eventually, Maskell found another victim. And Cindy wondered, why doesn't he want me anymore? And this is so typical of victims that have been traumatized for a year and a half. You're being told that this is God's work and all this stuff, and you're getting all this attention, and when you fight against it, they threaten you, but then all of a sudden you're dropped like a hot potato. And she felt a certain way about it, and she said that she hopes that the pictures do surface so that all these other perpetrators that were involved in her abuse that she saw on the Polaroids will be brought to justice. That's what she hopes. That's a tall order to hope that something like, I don't want to get upset, but that's a tall order to hope that something like that will come forward so that you can get justice. But then that would be shown to people in order to do it. But long story short, she ran into Maskell years later, and he recognized her. And she said she looked nothing like she did as a child. And she, by the way, she also outcried to her boyfriend that she had for 20 years. So for 20 years before this happened, so I guess it would be 94, she'd been telling everybody, or telling her boyfriend. And she also went through the church's mediation, which we'll get into. We'll get into the church's mediation because it's a whole other thing. You will literally be shocked. So let's talk about the dig at Holy Cross Cemetery. This is 1990, and we've talked about how Maskell was at St. Clement, abuses Charles Franz allegedly, gets moved to the all-girls school, Keough. Then things start happening at Keough. Then he gets moved elsewhere, and there's all these little moves which might have victims. We don't know, because you know what? If you go through mediation and sign something, you might never know. But he ends up between 82 and 92 at Holy Cross. He's there, and he arranges to have a large tract of area dug such that he needed a front loader, guys. Allegedly, the area was the size of a room. 12 feet by essentially 12 feet, and I think it was like 13 feet deep or 10 feet deep, okay? The size of the room I'm in here, my room might be a little bigger than that, but this size of this room, okay? Deep, dug, in order to hide documents. Oh, now you know what kind of documents, right? You getting the feeling you might know these psychological tests, these Polaroid pictures, the stuff he uses as blackmail, the stuff he uses to put pressure on people, the summaries of people's families. God, who knows what kind of junk this guy had, what kind of trophies. A friend of Maskell, Dr. Lee Richmond, we've already mentioned her, asked him directly why in the world he was digging in the cemetery. Why would you as a head be digging around in the cemetery? That's kind of why. And he told her that a lot of weeds needed to be straightened out. Calling Dr. Freud, a lot of weeds need to be straightened out? Oh, come on. Then he said that he was, quote, burying psychological papers that he didn't want to get into anyone's hands. Now, in my opinion, Lee should have been like, "Arr! What psychological papers? You don't have your doctorate. Why are you burying psychological papers?" She said she found it odd. That's what she said. Now, one person's version of odd and another person's version of odd vary wildly. Okay? And I've worked at offices that had confidential files. Many offices that had confidential files. Hell, I was one of the people that shredded said confidential files after the time period to keep them was up. I can't with this. William Story, the caretaker at Holy Cross and employed by Maskell at Holy Cross, was tasked with getting the hole dug and filling it back up and reseeding the area to make it look like nothing was there. When the trench was finally dug with the front loader, Maskell was bringing 3 truckloads of documents, boxes, plastic bags, to put in this hole. And when Maskell was off getting another load, so a load had been put in, and he was off getting another load or 2, Story took it upon himself to get down in the hole and to open up and look in some of the boxes. And he allegedly saw and removed some incriminating photographs, pornographic pictures of girls. Okay? We're not talking about smutty magazines. We're talking about incriminating pictures of young girls. So he took some of these photographs from the diggings and he began to blackmail Maskell with these photographs. I gotta give it to you. I gotta give it to you. One bad guy meets another bad guy. And I wouldn't even say bad guy, but I'm just saying blackmail is not a kindly thing. But in this case, it's like blackmail the scumbag. So Maskell fires Story on January 7th, 1991. So the boxes were in the ground for months, and he was starting to get blackmailed, and so he fires Story. I'm not sure if Story blackmailed him after he got fired or before he got fired. That I'm not sure of, but think. There's stuff in the ground at Holy Cross, and there's some pictures allegedly held by this guy, Story. And he leaves in 1991, so he has these pictures. And then when the lawsuit in 1994, the Jane Roe and Jane Doe lawsuit hits, Story goes ahead and drops a dime on Maskell. And so the lawsuit makes the news. August 10th, 1994, Story tips off the police about the buried documents at Holy Cross having to deal with Maskell, saying, hey, there's stuff in there, go get it. Go get that stuff against this bad guy. Again, another witness, essentially. This is a bad guy that's buried bad stuff. So a news station, WMAR, videoed the search and the unearthing process at the cemetery. And allegedly, representatives of the Archdiocese were also there. So think, there was a search warrant served. You don't just show up and start digging. So I want to know, where's the search warrant? Because you had a return on that search warrant. I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. So Deep Throat, this is in the Keepers, is a former detective from the Baltimore Police Department, said that the dig evidence was taken right to the state's attorney's office of Sharon May on August 9th, 1994. That's when they got the search warrant. And at 7 a.m., 11 police officers and the Baltimore County homicide detectives, they sifted through the documents and they placed selected documents in black plastic trash bags. And this was all allegedly given over to Sharon A. May. And Story was talking about how big this area was, and he was saying, quote, I could have buried a backhoe in there. I was told, don't ask why. So that was whenever he asked Father Maskell, like, why am I doing this? He was like, don't ask why. And so that was one of the reasons he jumped in there and had taken the documents, by the way. So let's talk about how all these documents get to Sharon May's office. A lot of folks, you know, when you want to doubt somebody's veracity, a lot of folks watching the Keepers doubted Sharon May's truthfulness. She talks about how she drove her brand new red convertible to oversee this search at the Holy Cross dig. And note, her husband was a police officer at the time, but I don't think she was a police officer for that department. But she was she was the wife of a police officer. So people want to scream cover up about why what happens ends up happening, but she claims that there were not any inappropriate photographs that she can remember. She's very illegal in her responses to Ryan of the Keepers. I know how attorneys respond to things, you know, I don't recall, I don't remember, but she says, you know, she didn't recall any inappropriate photographs of girls at the dig, because then that would be evidence, right? And you'd have to act on that. So someone said that Sharon May paraphrased, oh, this is what a victim said. I don't think this is in the Keepers, but someone who had went to Sharon May allegedly as a victim and said that she had made the comment, you can open a window and say, has anyone been abused by Father Maskell? Please come on up. Essentially saying to the victim, like, there's so many of them. Like, you could open a window and hit, you know, throw a rock and hit a victim. So I guess she was admitting, in essence, that there were tons of people that said they had been bothered, you know, by abused, SA by Father Maskell, but she said that there wasn't anything that she could stick, that each victim had to stand on their own, and that there wasn't enough evidence to move forward, and that was her opinion. And I got to add another source that feeds into the MKUltra theory, okay? And I believe I found this in the newspaper articles. A source said there was really nothing sinister in there. He said that Maskell and a psychologist used a federal grant to set up psychological testing center in 1975, and that Father Maskell took the records to Holy Cross with him in 1985. Someone please look up what psychological testing was done in 1975 at some center, and that there's a federal grant involved. Now, that could just be him telling somebody why he had documents that got planted, but that was a source, and that ended up in the paper. I want to know what federal grant, because you know what, that's MKUltra. In my opinion, that is MKUltra all the way. But I saw that and my eyes got big. It was like, what the hell? Let's find out what federal grant would be giving someone that's not a doctor permission to be giving these psychological tests. It's fascinating. I have no idea what that involved. But long story short, Sharon May claimed that there wasn't enough to charge Father Maskell, and she seemingly thought it was possible that the victims, you know, that there was truth in it, but that they just didn't have enough evidence to move forward. Some have said that the dig contained psychological test evaluation and canceled checks. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, canceled checks. Canceled checks. This is MKUltra 2.0. Canceled checks. Why do you have canceled checks in there? Because the stuff that you can find on MKUltra, the only stuff that didn't get shredded, the 99.99% that didn't get shredded were canceled checks. Again, Maskell is not authorized to be giving psychological tests to anyone, and what the hell are canceled checks about? So the dig was taken to an evidence room in a basement, and this basement flooded in Hurricane Isabel. And I looked it up, and I think Hurricane Isabel happened in 2003. Correct me if I'm wrong. So 10 years later, the evidence was destroyed. Does that make sense to you? Like you couldn't dry the documents and assess the documents' veracity, and now the documents are destroyed? Okay, all right. So the gossip runs, the speculation and the gossip runs that these documents were sent off to Fort Meade, which may or may not be true, because also there's a possible tie-in with the Malecki murder, and that again has ties into Fort Meade. I don't know, but that's what the gossip runs. That the documents are out there, and they were sent to Fort Meade, and then other people said nope, they were at Fort Meade. Now they're at another military installation, but I don't know. The caretaker, William Story, that allegedly blackmailed Maskell over some of the Polaroids, now has dementia. We don't know now where the Polaroids are at. When asked as to why Maskell buried the documents, because he did ask, he was allegedly told that there was a ban on public burning, and that Maskell didn't want to break the law. So, he was trying to do a good thing, burying these documents. It defies comprehension, the level of evil, and then trying to mask yourself as a good guy. I also want to add that once the real lawsuits that were filed in 94 began, Maskell runs off for treatment for anxiety and stress over the lawsuits. So commonly he was off. Like, say, when Sharon May tries to interview him, then they go and put him in a treatment center or someplace that made it hard for them to then depose him or talk to him. It really was quite a mess. We've talked about Sister Cathy's last days. We've talked about Father Maskell. We've talked about the outcry witnesses, the victims from St. Clement and Keough. We've talked about Father Maskell and his MO, the way he operated with these victims. We've talked about where he hid his trophies at the Holy Cross Cemetery, and how they finally got the documents in the hands of law enforcement, and that the law enforcement is now alleging that they didn't really find anything that was enough to go with. All right, and now it's destroyed due to the hurricane. So now let's pop back to Sister Cathy. All right, now you're knowing. Now you kind of get the feeling of the kind of stuff that was going on at Keough. And you know now that at least 3 different people, seemingly students, reached out to Sister Cathy. And Sister Cathy said, I'm going to do something about it. And then over that summer, she moved to the different school. So a lot of these victims that came forward, the ones towards the end, didn't even know Sister Cathy, because they were still being abused at Keough even after she left. Let that sink in. Because if Father Maskell was a part of murdering Cathy, he kept doing it, allegedly abusing, after she was dead. So let's talk about some of the other people. So let's talk now about Gerald J. Koob, the former boyfriend or friend of Sister Cathy. Jesuit priest Jerry Koob met Sister Cathy in 1966. They met at a retreat, and he interned at Archbishop Keough. Allegedly, they had dated, and whatever you want to make of that. And he was a close friend of Sister Cathy for at least 3 years. A few years prior, I believe it was in 67, Jerry asked Sister Cathy to marry him and gave her a ring. And she allegedly declined him and said, no, we I need to stay in the church, and you're going to be a Jesuit priest. And she declined him. But they stayed very close, and on November 3rd, she wrote him an extremely long handwritten letter. So it was 3 days before she was murdered. I believe she wrote it at 12:30 in the afternoon. She even put the time on the letter. The letter written on November 3rd, 1969 at 12:30 a.m. was emotional and hurt by something said or done by Koob. But she does say things like, I want to have your children, I want to have you inside me, things like that. So it was essentially a love letter, in my opinion. And we don't know the entire contents of the letter. Some people have it's in the morgue notes, and some people have written it out longhand, but that's not shared with the general public, and nor does it kind of needs to be. I don't think it needs to be. But the letter allegedly implies by its subject matter that they had been in a sexual relationship. I mean, you could read between the lines, and that Sister Cathy loved him and wanted to have his children. But I want to note for the record, Koob has denied having a sexual relationship with Sister Cathy. But then, allegedly, according to an investigator, Romer, he did admit to having a sexual relationship with Cathy, but that he just didn't want her name sullied because, like, it would be breaking a vow or something like that. So I just want to point that out, that Koob has said, all right, so this is his official statements, let's be fair, that they had a love between two celibates and a commitment to Christ. So that's what he's saying. Now, two different people have said that once they were pressed him, he said, yeah, we did have, relations, but it's you just don't want to make it look like she broke her vows or whatever. But he's saying he didn't, so that's what he's saying. He did say that he talked to her on the 4th, and he was saying, I'll leave the priesthood for you. And then he said that she told him midweek, so it would have been on the 4th, that she had something important to tell him. But she never got the chance to tell him, whatever it was. So now he's left to speculate, was she going to tell him about the abuse at Keough? Or was she going to accept his marriage proposal? Or is she just going to tell him, hey, I'm going back to the convent? Or is she going to tell him, I'm not going back to the convent on the 31st of December? We don't know. Okay? The Jesuits, Koob and John A. Pete McKeon, on the day, that final day, they get the call from Sister Russell, or 12. So they get to the apartment before 1 a.m. and they telephone the police. So let's go through the timeline. Let's be really clear about the timeline. At 8:30 that night, someone saw Cathy's car swing into its reserve spot. 8:30. And at 10:30, the car is seen parked at a second location, and that's when somebody called in the police. So I think that was 10:05. So it looks to me, if you were to go and backtrack by what people had said witness-wise, looks like Cathy was taken by somebody in the parking lot way before Koob got there. So Jesuits, Koob and Pete McKeon, they get to the apartment way before 1. I think they get to the apartment between 12 and 1. And then by 1 o'clock, they're there with Russ, and they call the police saying Cathy's a missing person. Koob's alibi before that is totally linked to Pete. He said that they went to dinner in Annapolis. They went to Easy Rider to see a movie. And I believe the movie was between 8 and 9:40. They had the ticket stubs. They sat around back at Manresa. That's where Koob lived. I think it's called Manresa on the Severn. And they had Tia Maria, that's a liqueur, and they talked about the movie, like most people do after they see a good movie. And that's when Sister Russell called them at Manresa, and then they rushed to the carriage house. Once they were at the carriage house, about 1 o'clock, the police were called. And Koob says that they sat for, after the police came, they sat for several, they being, the police took the report, and I guess they left. And that they, being Koob, McKeon, and Sister Russell, sat together from between 1 and 4, might have been 4:40, but they sat together essentially for 3 hours, talking and doing mass and waiting for Sister Cathy to come home. And that then at one point, Pete went for a walk. So they go out for a walk and they find the car. And the car was found a block away at 4500 block of Carriage Court, and it was in a no parking area. I think it was in a yellow line area, and that's one of the reasons why people had called it in. So they find it a block away. And the keepers, for some reason, it makes it look like it's like right there and that's its normal like parking spot if it had been moved in a little more. No, it was, I believe it was a solid block away. So that's maybe one reason why they didn't see the car on their way there from Manresa to the Carriage House Apartments. But I do have some questions regarding Koob. Now, I'm not saying, oh, I think that he was involved with Sister Cathy's murder. Not at all. But I do have some issues with him. I'm like Tom Nugent in a way. I have some issues with him, and I'm going to tell you why I have the issues with him. Number one, why wasn't Koob out looking for Cathy when she was missing? Maybe he did, and maybe he just didn't make it into the testimony, all right? Like, why didn't they take Pete McKeon's car and look to see if her car had broken down or like she'd run out of gas? Wouldn't that be your natural first inclination? You would think, oh, you know, maybe she ran out of gas. Maybe her car popped, you know, got her tire got a nail in it and her tire blew. I mean, you wouldn't think someone's abducted. That would be to go look the place you knew she went would be your natural inclination. And if that wasn't done, that is suspicious to me to sit around for 3 hours. That's highly suspicious to me. That's number one. And I'm going to also, well, my second issue. I have problems with his story when in the Keepers when he keeps talking about how Cathy turned him down. Okay, that's true, I think. Cathy turned him down in 67. I think we all agree that that's accurate. However, not much is made of this passionate letter of the 3rd and his then commenting that he would have left the order for her on the 4th. They were seemingly in really passionate place. And to make it like in some of the reports where they're just a celibate in commitment with Christ, when it's seemingly this really tumultuous love going on, there's a dichotomy between that's not resolved for me. Now you could say they didn't look around. I don't know why you'd say they didn't look around, but the second part you could say, oh, well, he didn't want it to look like she'd broken her vows. Well, at this point, you know she's dead now. I mean, we're in 2021. You know, 2020, this was in 2017 when The Keepers was filmed. You knew she was dead. Now we can just drop all the pretenses about expecting her to be a perfect person. Let's tell the complete story to get the complete answer. But that's my second issue, okay? And I have a third issue, but I'll get to that in the timeline. So, they find the car, right? It's parked illegally. It's parked a block away. Jerry opens the driver's side door. The Muley's buns that she's purchased. Some people have said they were in the passenger seat, but the photos show that it was in the footwell. Okay, you have the Muley's buns. You even have that little string they tie around an unopened package. It's all like that. Koob also said he noticed a tipped over wastebasket in the car, and I think it was between the front seats, and I think you also see that in the pictures where you see the buns and you see it looks like maybe tissues. I think that's from the tipped over wastebasket. So that's what Koob said he saw when they found the car, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is Cathy's car. It is unlocked. Koob notes that Cathy always locked her doors, so that was unusual. The key was in the ignition, so obviously someone wasn't looking to steal the car because they left it there with the key in the ignition. And also there was this little thing tied to the turn signal, and he said it looked as if it had been tied there. I think he might have also mentioned that there was a broken umbrella in the back seat. So later, of course, Koob is interrogated by the police because they call and say, hey, her car's here. Oh my God, come. And they come out to the scene and they talk to all the parties involved. And then we know now that Sharon Hamel-Bush comes over later that day and is asked by one of these detectives in a trench coat, what she knew about the abuse essentially going on at Keough, and she didn't know anything about it. So obviously had been a topic of discussion at some point throughout the night. Also, note Tom Nugent brings up, why in the world didn't Pete or Jerry go home? Like the next day when Sharon's Bush is there, they're there still. They're at the apartment with Russ. So I don't know. There's some questions about what was being discussed. So eventually Koob becomes a suspect, especially after Sister Cathy's body is discovered. And it looks like a crime of passion. And so later, when he's interrogated by the police officer about his relationship with Sister Cathy, which he's still claiming allegedly was quite platonic, allegedly a police officer threw what Koob believed was her vagina wrapped in newspaper onto the table in order to threaten him, to rattle him. And I gotta say that this part of the Keepers was totally unbelievable to me, because a body part would be at the medical examiner's office. Her body would then, after the medical examiner does what they need to do, would be buried. So it would never be at a police department. And a body part wouldn't be there. It wouldn't have been her vagina. I don't know if some overzealous detective or police officer decided to try to freak him out because he wasn't giving them the answers they wanted, that they put some old piece of lunch or something rotten and threw it, put it in newspaper and threw it in front of him to freak him out. I don't know. But be that as it may, he tells that story. And Captain John Barnhalt Jr. swears that his officers would never have done something like that, no matter what, pretending to have a murder victim's body part and using it to menace a suspect. So he says that's a no, it didn't happen. And allegedly Koob did pass 2 lie detector tests, and just FYI, so make of that what you will. It's another thing that I have an issue that he tells that story. It's a fantastical story. You hear it on the thing and you're like, whoa, that's not true. Basically, that's the third issue I have with Koob, is that fantastical story. Was it fantastical because he believed it and some officer threw some thing in front of him, or did it just not happen at all and he used it as a diverting tactic in the interview? I have no idea. And the last issue I have with Koob is about the letter that Cathy wrote him allegedly on November 3rd, how that was obtained. Because Detective Romer, when he thought Koob was a suspect, allegedly went to Manresa and allegedly found the letter and took it with him. And then Koob allegedly said, no, that's not how it went. I gave it all over. So it's almost like a disagreement as to whether the letter was given willingly, or if he had read it yet, because I think the time period was quite tight. And yet there's another letter that goes to Cathy's sister that doesn't arrive until after her death, or after she's missing. So it wouldn't surprise me if that also came to Koob later and arrived at Manresa. Who's to know or say? But there is some disagreement about that letter. In the Keepers, the letter is typed. That's actually just a demonstration for the docuseries. That's not the real letter. The real letter was allegedly handwritten in Cathy's handwriting, and now some people conspiracy are saying it's not Cathy's handwriting. So who's to say? Now it's all jammed up. But there was some kind of a letter sent because something was taken from Manresa by Romer. Romer allegedly thought I think he's not with us anymore. He thought Koob was a suspect and thought Koob could crack at any minute and all this stuff. So regarding Koob, I don't know if the things that I have reservations about are simply because he's protecting Sister Cathy's honor, and I mean that's understandable. I don't know. Something sets wrong with me, but I can't exactly explain why. I think the thing that really bothers me the most about Koob is the fact that they allegedly sat around for all that time and didn't look for Sister Cathy. Now, if they did look for Sister Cathy and it just hasn't been reported, then I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. But to sit around with Sister Russell when all this stuff allegedly went on the day before, with the priest bursting in and all this stuff, and her telling the detective allegedly that something was going on with the students at Keough that need to be looked into. The fact that one had been discussed with McKeon and Koob is unbelievable to me, Because if someone's missing and they've gone missing for this long and it's 1 o'clock and you've called and you're sitting there for 3 hours, that is what you're going to be talking about. And to say that I knew nothing about the sexual abuse at Keough, I find that hard to believe. But, who's to say what the truth is?
Hi folks, this is where my battery died. So if you like this video, part 1, please hit the like and please hit the subscribe bell. And part 2 will be upcoming very soon. And thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.